Why museums sometimes hide art from the public. Imagine visiting a famous museum. You walk through room after room filled with paintings and sculptures. You expect to see the world's greatest treasures. But here is something most visitors never realize. The majority of a museum's collection may not be on display at all. Thousands of artworks can be sitting somewhere you will never see them. Behind closed doors. Inside carefully controlled storage rooms. Wrapped in protective materials. Sometimes for years. Sometimes for decades. Why would a museum hide its own art? The answer is more complicated than you might think. A museum is not simply a building filled with things that people want to look at. It is also an archive, a research institution, a conservation laboratory, and a guardian of objects that may need protection from the public itself. One of the biggest reasons artworks are kept in storage is simple. There is not enough gallery space. A museum might own tens of thousands of objects but have room to display only a small percentage at any one time. Think about a library. A library does not put every book it owns on a table. Most books remain on shelves or in storage until someone needs them. Museums work in a similar way. Their storage collections are enormous. Paintings, drawings, photographs, sculptures, textiles, ceramics, historical objects. Some are famous. Others may be known only to specialists. But every object can have research or historical value. And sometimes an artwork is stored because displaying it could damage it. Light is one of the biggest threats. As we explored in the previous episode, light can gradually change pigments and weaken sensitive materials. Paper, textiles, photographs, and some watercolors can be especially vulnerable. A museum may therefore display an artwork for a limited period and then return it to darkness. The artwork is not being forgotten. It is being protected. Imagine a delicate watercolor that has survived for 200 years. If the museum displayed it continuously for decades, the colors might fade. Instead, the museum may show it briefly. Then it goes back into controlled storage. Another reason is physical fragility. Some artworks are simply too delicate to move frequently. A fragile canvas may be vulnerable to vibration. A sculpture may have a weak structural point. A textile may be too delicate to hang permanently. A work on paper may need to remain flat. In these cases, storage can actually be safer than exhibition. But there is another reason museums sometimes keep art away from public view. The artwork may be undergoing conservation. You may see a painting disappear from a gallery for months or even years. That does not necessarily mean it has been forgotten. It may be undergoing a detailed examination. Conservators might be repairing tears, stabilizing loose paint, removing unstable materials, studying old restoration, or simply monitoring changes in its condition. Some treatments are incredibly slow. A conservator may spend hundreds of hours working on a single object. During that time, the artwork may be unavailable to visitors. And then there are objects that are hidden for ethical or legal reasons. A museum may discover that an artwork has a complicated ownership history. Perhaps it was stolen. Perhaps it was looted during a war. Perhaps it was taken from another country under circumstances that are now being questioned. The museum may temporarily remove the object, while researchers investigate its provenance. In some cases, the investigation can eventually lead to restitution. The artwork may be returned to a family, community, or country. This means that an empty space in a museum gallery can sometimes represent a very important story. It can mean that the institution is reconsidering how the object came into its collection. There are also objects that museums choose not to display because of their cultural sensitivity. Some indigenous communities, for example, have traditions involving sacred or ceremonial objects that were never intended for public display. A museum may hold such objects in its collection but restrict access. Modern museum practice increasingly recognizes that ownership does not automatically mean unlimited display. The wishes and rights of the communities connected to an object can matter deeply. And sometimes, the museum may have an object that is simply too disturbing for a normal gallery. Human remains are an obvious example. Some museums hold human remains as part of historical or archaeological collections. Today, many institutions have reconsidered whether displaying them publicly is ethical. The question becomes more than, can we display this? Becomes, should we? This is one of the biggest changes happening in museums today. For a long time, museums often believed that anything in their collections could be studied and displayed. But modern museum ethics increasingly asks who has the right to decide. The people connected to the object, the descendants, the community, the original culture, or the institution that currently holds it. These questions do not always have easy answers. There is another fascinating category: artworks that are hidden because they are disputed. Imagine a museum owns a painting believed to be by a famous artist. Years later, new research questions the attribution. Is it really by the artist? Or was it created by a follower? Or perhaps by someone else entirely? The museum may remove it from display while experts investigate. The painting has not necessarily become worthless. It may actually become more interesting. Researchers can study it, compare it with authenticated works, analyze its materials, examine its history. Sometimes an artwork disappears from the gallery, while its scientific importance increases. And then there is the most surprising reason of all. Some museums have more art than they can even properly examine. Collections can grow over generations. Museums receive donations. They acquire works. They inherit collections. They purchase objects. They sometimes receive entire estates. The result can be enormous. Storage becomes a second museum, but it is a museum without visitors. Rows of paintings, thousands of boxes, shelves filled with objects, climate-controlled rooms, specialized racks. Every object carefully labeled and recorded. It may look like a warehouse, but it can contain treasures that have not been seen by the public for generations. Researchers may discover something remarkable inside these storage rooms. An overlooked painting may turn out to be by an important artist. A damaged object may reveal hidden information. A forgotten photograph may become historically significant. A museum's greatest discovery can sometimes happen not in the gallery, but in the basement. So when you visit a museum and see only a small selection of its collection, remember what you are not seeing. Behind those gallery walls may be thousands of stories. Some are sleeping in darkness because they are fragile. Some are waiting for conservation. Some are being researched. Some are involved in ownership disputes. Some are too culturally sensitive to display. And some are simply waiting for their moment. Museums do not necessarily hide art because they want to keep it from us. Sometimes they hide it because they want to protect it. Sometimes because they are still trying to understand it. And sometimes because displaying it would raise questions that cannot be answered by simply putting an object behind glass. The next time you walk through a museum, look at the empty spaces as well as the masterpieces. Ask yourself what might be stored somewhere beyond the walls. A painting waiting for restoration. A forgotten sculpture. A photograph no one has studied for decades. Or an object whose story is still being debated. The museum you see is only the visible part of a much larger world. Behind every gallery is another museum. One filled with objects waiting in silence. And sometimes the most fascinating story is the artwork that you cannot see. Gallery Experience: Hidden Stories Behind Art. Episode 13. Why Museums Sometimes Hide Art from the Public.